Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, Peleliu, Fallujah, Chosin Reservoir. Those are just a handful of some of the U.S. Marines' most iconic battles. But what about the battle that actually gave the Marines their nickname Devil Dogs? I'm talking about the Battle of Belleau Wood, fought in France in June of 1918 during the First World War. Hi, welcome to the channel. So today I'm reacting to the most nightmarish Marine fight in history, which is on the channel Dark Docs. Let's get to it.
General John J. Pershing, commander of the American Expeditionary Forces, called the Battle of Belleau Wood, quote, the biggest battle since Appomattox and the most considerable engagement American troops have ever had with a foreign enemy. In June of 1918, as Russia had withdrawn from World War I, Germany relocated thousands of soldiers to France and launched a massive offensive to end the war. But as the German army breached the Western Front and attempted to advance to Paris, it faced fierce resistance from Allied forces. A robust contingent of thousands of American soldiers and Marines arrived to fight the weakened Germans in the Belleau Wood Preserve area, and the first large-scale battle fought by U.S. forces during World War I ensued. Fighting mainly in the dark, with fixed bayonets, poison gas, and hand-to-hand combat amidst harsh wood terrains and overgrown wheat fields, the Marines engaged in savage combat that cemented their place in history as some of the fiercest of warriors.
A few quick points. The USSR withdrew from the war because of the Bolshevik Revolution. They couldn't handle the revolution plus fighting in a war. There were more Marine casualties during this 3-week battle than all other Marine Corps battles combined.
The German advance. In March of 1918, the Germans launched the Ludendorff Offensive, a campaign to attack the Western Front before the United States deployed all their forces during World War I. A peace treaty with the Russians on the Eastern Front had freed up around 50 German divisions. They were now stationed in France and outnumbered the local army.
The German Spring Offensive, also called Operation Michael, the main goal was to end the war and force a treaty before the Americans could actually step in.
The Germans achieved significant victories during the first weeks, and after the Third Battle of the Aisne in late May, they reached the north bank of the Marne River at Château-Thierry. The enemies were now 59 miles from Paris, and it became a priority to halt their progress. On May 31st, the U.S. forces supported the Senegalese tirailleurs to hold the German advance into Château-Thierry, forcing them to veer towards Vaux and Belleau Wood. After several fierce confrontations the next day, Château-Thierry and Vaux ultimately fell, and the Germans moved into Belleau Wood, a square-mile game preserve beside a large wheat field. The area suddenly became an immensely strategic point, and U.S. forces were deployed en masse to support British and French troops. The American 2nd Infantry Division was summoned along the Paris-Metz highway. The 9th Infantry Regiment covered the area between the highway and the Marne, while the 6th Marine Regiment covered their left. The 5th Marine and the 23rd Infantry Regiments were put on reserve. Army General James Harbord commanded the Marine Brigade. The Allied forces would then work together to drive the Germans out of Belleau Wood. First attacks. On the evening of June 1st, the German forces pierced through the French lines to the left of the Marines' position. The American 23rd Infantry and the 5th Marine Regiments immediately marched over 10 kilometers to plug the gap in the line. By nightfall the next day, they held a 12-mile front line along the rough terrain with thick bushes. This swift action might have prevented the Germans from marching into Paris. Meanwhile, the Germans set a major offensive through Belleau Wood, hoping to allow other German troops to cross the Marne River. The French had ordered to dig trenches further to the rear, but General Harbord had his men hold their ground instead. The Marines dug shallow fighting positions with their bayonets to target enemies from a prone position. On the afternoon of June 3rd, the Germans approached the Marines' location, but the Americans waited until the enemy was 100 yards from them to open fire. The attack proved successful, and the surviving Germans retreated into the forest. However, the demoralized French soldiers kept urging the Americans to retreat, but Captain Lloyd Williams famously exclaimed, quote, "Retreat? Hell, we just got here."
Unfortunately, he did go on to die a few days later in battle, but his unit, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment, is actually the most highly decorated Marine battalion in all of history. And in honor of Captain Williams, they actually adopted the motto, "Retreat, Hell."
Soon, the Marines stood alone defending the area. At one point, while Captain George Wallace Hamilton and the 49th Company were getting into position, they were surrounded by German machine guns. But Hamilton caught the enemies off guard, capturing the guns and securing them for friendly forces. He was later awarded 2 Distinguished Service Crosses and a Navy Cross for his actions. By June 4th, Major General Omar Bundy of the 2nd Division took command of the U.S. forces. That same day, Intelligence Officer Lieutenant William A. Eddy and 2 men infiltrated German lines and gathered key information. Having undergone heavy casualties, the Germans had dug out a defensive line through Belleau Wood. They were also consolidating their machine gun positions and gathering artillery. Though an attack was not imminent, the increasing strength of the German forces raised concerns about a possible advance to Paris. Over the next 2 days, the Americans managed to repel several enemy attacks. The French 167th Division eventually arrived, and the Allies were able to secure 2,000 yards of front.
I just want to clarify that the majority of the fighting was done by the French and the Americans. The Marines were there as well as the U.S. Army. But let's not forget that Great Britain also had support elements from their 9th Corps there as well.
The heart of the battle. On June 6th at 3:45 a.m., the Allies set off an assault against the Germans before they could even launch an attack of their own. The French 167th Division attacked through the left of the Marines' line, while the 1st Battalion, 6th Marine Regiment, went for Hill 142 to prevent flanking fire towards the French. The Marines relied on their combat superiority due to their rifle marksmanship. Moreover, the open warfare doctrine of General John J. Pershing mandated fast-moving and aggressive attacks to overwhelm the Germans and push them behind enemy lines. During a German counterattack on Hill 142, Gunnery Sergeant Ernest A. Jansen withstood 12 enemy soldiers by bayoneting 2 of them and forcing the rest to flee. He became the first U.S. Marine to receive the Medal of Honor during World War I. And machine gunner Henry Hulbert was also recognized with the Distinguished Service Cross for advancing through enemy fire during the same battle.
9 Medals of Honor were actually given at this battle.
As the second phase of the attack took off, the Allies failed to scout the woods thoroughly and missed a network of German machine gun nests and artillery. While advancing in waves from the west into the forest through the open wheat field, the 3rd Division, 5th and 6th Marine Battalions stumbled upon German machine gun fire. The 5th Regiment was shredded, while the 6th fought their way into the forest's southern edge. They encountered even more machine gun nests, sharpshooters, and barbed wire, and engaged in hand-to-hand combat. As the Americans were crawling and trying to survive against an implacable German force, 2-time Medal of Honor honoree 1st Sergeant Dan Daly flaunted his bayonet over his head and shouted the famous words, quote, "Come on, you sons of bitches. Do you want to live forever?" The Marines with him stood up and charged back. In the meantime, 2 companies from the 2nd Battalion, 6th Marine Regiment, crossed 800 yards towards the nearby village of Beaureche. Without artillery support, the companies withered at German gunfire coming from the woods. The remaining Marines made their way into the village and bravely expelled the Germans.
Mistake number 1, there was no recon, so they underestimated the enemy's strength, which was about 2,000 German troops and 30 machine guns. Mistake number 2, because they were new to this war, they had not learned the hard lesson that the French and British had learned, which was you don't do a frontal assault without artillery support. They had to cross 800 meters of an open wheat field with no cover, facing machine guns, small arms, and artillery.
Despite having captured Hill 142 and gaining a foothold in Belleau Wood, the Marines endured crippling losses that day. More than 1,000 men were injured and 222 lost their lives. It was the largest number of casualties suffered by a single American brigade in World War I up to that point. Commanding officer Major Thomas Holcomb described the feat in a letter to his wife, quote, "The regiment has carried itself with undying glory, but the price was heavy. My battalion did wonderfully. There never was such self-sacrifice, courage, and spirit shown." Taking Belleau Wood. With soldiers from the 2nd Regiment of Engineers and the 6th Machine Gun Battalion, the remaining Marines continued to face German forces as they attempted to take Belleau Wood. The ensuing confrontations proved increasingly brutal. The trees were heavily splintered with shelling, and loads of deadly wooden splinters and metal shrapnel laid on the ground.
If you want to see a good example of trees exploding during an arty barrage, then watch episode 6 of Band of Brothers, The Breaking Point, where they're actually being shelled during the Battle of the Bulge.
The Germans resorted to mustard gas to halt the American advances. Numerous hand-to-hand clashes broke out, using knives, rifle butts, bayonets, and even trench shovels. As Marine and non-commissioned officers fell, junior officers and soldiers took their places.
This is why the U.S. Army and Marines teach every soldier their job as well as 2 ranks above you.
Still, by June 11th, the American forces had secured most of Belleau Wood. The Germans fiercely counterattacked 2 days later, attempting to claim their former positions.
Can somebody tell me what kind of tank that is, please?
But the French army unleashed a decisive bombardment that lasted 14 hours, allowing the Marines to dislodge the enemies. The battle would continue for 2 more weeks. The Marines executed a total of 6 planned attacks to expel the Germans. Finally, on June 26th, a final confrontation in the forests cleared Belleau Wood of all enemy forces. Major Shearer submitted a report later that day that read, quote, "Wood's now U.S. Marine Corps entirely." Aftermath. The French government renamed the forest Bois de la Brigade de la Marine in honor of the honorable sacrifice from the Marines during that fateful month. And members of the 4th Marine Brigade were awarded the French Croix de Guerre. The battle was an essential step towards the defeat of Germany, but it also proved incredibly brutal. Out of 9,500 American soldiers, about 1,000 were killed in action, and 4,000 were either wounded, gassed, or missing. The 2nd Battalion alone endured 764 casualties out of 900 men. Historian George B. Clark later wrote, quote, "For all intents and purposes, the old warriors of the U.S. Marine Corps were virtually wiped out."
I just wanted to add that Germany and France suffered similar casualty numbers. However, America had the most, and I couldn't find any numbers on British casualties. If you are able to find that information, then please drop that in the comments. Thank you.
Despite its grim outcome, the Battle of Belleau Wood recognized the bravery of the Marines and changed the Marine Corps' lore forever, earning their elite fighter reputation and receiving the Devil Dogs moniker by their German counterparts. A German private later testified, quote, "We have Americans opposite us who are terribly reckless fellows."
Thank you guys so much for watching. My utmost respect to all those brave soldiers and Marines. Here's some trivia about this battle. Private Desmond Doss, the Medal of Honor recipient for the Battle of Okinawa, and whose story is told in the movie Hacksaw Ridge, his father actually fought in this battle and earned the Silver Star. Anyway, Sabaton does have a song called Devil Dogs, and once I reacted to that, I'll put it right here.